The unexpected call. It was a typical Saturday afternoon when I first received the call. I wasn't doing much, just lounging around my apartment, scrolling through social media, and catching up on the latest news. The weather outside was nothing special, overcast skies with the occasional drizzle, so there wasn't much motivation to go anywhere. The usual Saturday routine. No plans, no worries. But as I was scrolling through my phone, my screen lit up with a call from James. James had been my best friend for years, and in that time, we'd seen each other through the highs and lows. From the celebratory nights out to the heartbreaking moments we'd faced together, we'd always had each other's backs. But recently, something had changed. He'd been distant, quieter, and less involved in our usual hangouts. Work was always a factor, but I noticed a deeper shift. It wasn't just the lack of time spent with me. It was the lack of time spent with Liz, his wife. Liz and James had always been a couple I admired. They were the kind of couple everyone looked at and thought, they've got it all. They were both successful, smart, and seemed inseparable. But recently, I began noticing the small cracks in their perfect relationship. It wasn't anything major, but the shift was undeniable. They weren't the same, and I couldn't figure out why. I pushed the thought aside. Everyone has their issues, right? So when my phone buzzed with James's name on the screen, I figured it was just a casual check-in. "Hey, man. What's up?" I answered, trying to sound casual, though I couldn't help but notice how tense I felt. His voice on the other end was different, cracked, almost like he'd been holding something in. "Kyle, I need a favor. Something came up, and I can't make it back home. You gotta go help Liz. She's in a bit of a bind." I frowned, feeling a rush of confusion. "Wait, what happened? Is everything okay?" James hesitated. "Yeah, it's fine. She just needs a hand with some stuff at the house. I've been trying to get her to do it on her own, but it's not working out. Can you go check on her? She's kind of freaking out, and I can't leave work right now." I rubbed my eyes, processing his words. I don't know, man. What's going on? What does she need help with?" "Look, Kyle, I can't explain it all now. Just go. Please, she's not in a good place." I felt a mix of hesitation and uncertainty. I'd known Liz for years, and we were friendly, but helping her out wasn't something I'd ever really done before, at least not without James around. Still, it was James asking. I couldn't just brush him off. "All right," I said, grabbing my car keys from the counter. "I'll go over. But man, what's really going on?" There was a long pause before James spoke again. "Just go. I'll explain later." I could tell he was hiding something, but there wasn't much I could do about it. If James was in trouble, I wasn't about to leave his wife in a bind. I threw on a hoodie and left, unsure of what I was walking into. The drive over to James and Liz's place wasn't long, maybe 15 minutes, but it gave me some time to think. I hadn't really seen Liz in a while, and when I had, it was always with James around. We never really talked, just the two of us. Now I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. Something had shifted, and I wasn't sure what. When I arrived at their house, I parked in the driveway and stepped out. The house looked exactly the same. Well kept, cozy, nothing unusual. But as soon as I knocked on the door, a feeling of unease settled over me. It was like the atmosphere itself had changed. Liz opened the door, her face lighting up as if she hadn't expected me to actually show up. "Kyle," she said, her voice full of relief, though there was something else there, an undercurrent of tension. "I wasn't expecting you, but I'm so glad you're here." I offered a small smile, awkwardly stepping inside. "James sent me. He said you needed help." Liz stepped aside to let me in, her hands wringing nervously. "It's a bit of a mess, honestly. There's so much going on, and I'm trying to keep it all together, but it's hard." I followed her into the house, glancing around. The place looked the same, comfortable, familiar, but something was off. Liz led me into the living room, where a few boxes were stacked and papers were scattered around. It didn't look like anything too overwhelming, but Liz was acting like it was the end of the world. "So, what exactly do you need help with?" I asked, trying to keep the mood casual. But even I could tell I was treading on unfamiliar ground. Liz didn't answer immediately. She was pacing now, her hands wringing together, clearly anxious. I'm feeling overwhelmed, Kyle. There's so much going on, and I can't seem to get a handle on it all. And James isn't here, and it's like..." Her voice trailed off, as if she couldn't find the right words. I raised an eyebrow, trying to make sense of it all. "What do you mean, like he's not here?" Liz stopped pacing and looked at me. Her eyes were wide, her face pale. "It's like he's checked out, you know. He's been distant. We barely talk anymore. It's like he doesn't even care that I'm here." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I'd always seen James as this rock, someone who had everything together, someone who could weather any storm. But hearing Liz speak like this, I realized that I had no idea what was really going on in their relationship. I tried to reassure her, though I wasn't sure if my words would help. "Look, I'm sure it's just work, you know. Stress can do that to people. Maybe he's just in his head." But Liz shook her head. She didn't seem convinced. "I don't know, Kyle. Sometimes it feels like I'm invisible to him. Like I'm just here." I didn't know what to say. I could feel the weight of the conversation settling in. I wasn't sure how much I should be involved in this. It felt like it was crossing some kind of boundary. But one thing was clear: Liz was hurting, and she trusted me enough to let me see that side of her. "You're definitely not invisible to me," I said, trying to offer some comfort. The words felt strange coming from me, though. It wasn't a line I used often, especially not with a friend's wife. But it felt like the right thing to say. Liz smiled softly, though it was tinged with sadness. "Thanks, Kyle. That actually means more than you know." We sat there in silence for a moment, just the two of us. I couldn't help but notice how much closer I felt to her now. Something had shifted, and I wasn't sure if it was just the situation or something deeper. But in that moment, I didn't feel like just a guy helping out a friend's wife. It felt more complicated than that. I didn't know it then, but this was just the beginning. The beginning of something that would change everything. As I left later that day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking away from something significant, something I hadn't seen coming. The quiet storm. The next few days passed in a blur. I returned to my usual routine: work, gym, hanging out with friends. But my mind was never far from what had happened at Liz's house. The conversation we'd had lingered in the back of my mind, repeating itself like an echo. Her words, the vulnerability in her voice, the way she'd looked at me when she confessed how she felt invisible to James. It all sat with me in a way I hadn't expected. I had always thought of James and Liz as the perfect couple, the ideal example of what a relationship should look like. But now I realized I had only seen the surface. Beneath it, there was something far more complex. I had always prided myself on being the guy who kept things light. I was the one people called when they needed someone to joke around with or share a beer. I wasn't a therapist or a counselor, and I sure as hell didn't get involved in relationship drama. But this situation was different. Liz wasn't just another friend, and James wasn't just another guy in my social circle. They were family to me. James had been my best friend for as long as I could remember. We'd been through thick and thin, and I couldn't just stand by and ignore the cracks forming between them. Even though I didn't want to get caught up in their issues, I couldn't help but notice how distant James had become. He wasn't the same guy I used to know, the one who would drop everything to hang out or share a drink. Now he was always busy, too tired, or just absent. I noticed how often he checked his phone during our conversations, his mind clearly elsewhere. It wasn't that he wasn't there, but it felt like he wasn't fully there. And every time I saw Liz, she seemed more and more withdrawn. The tension between them was palpable, even when they were in the same room. I knew something had shifted, but I wasn't sure what. Was it just work? Was it something more? It was late one evening when I received another call from Liz. The number flashed on my screen, and for a moment, I hesitated. My first instinct was to let it go. After all, what could she possibly need this time? But something told me to pick up. I couldn't ignore her again, not when she had trusted me so completely before. "Hello," I answered, trying to sound casual, though the anxiety in my chest was building. "Kyle." Her voice was quiet, hesitant, like she wasn't sure whether to call or not. I really need to talk to someone. Can you come over?" I felt a tightness in my stomach as I processed her words. This wasn't a simple request for help with something around the house. This was something else, something more urgent. "Of course," I replied, even though I had no idea what I was about to walk into. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. The drive over to her place felt longer than it should have. I tried to keep my mind busy by focusing on the road, but all I could think about was what she had said. What did she need to talk about? Was it something about James? Was it about the conversation we'd had the other day? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was heading into uncharted territory. The more I tried to push the thought away, the more persistent it became. When I arrived at Liz's apartment, I felt a strange mix of apprehension and concern. Liz opened the door, but this time, there was a guarded look in her eyes. She didn't seem as relieved to see me as she had the last time, but there was still something there, something vulnerable, something raw. "Thanks for coming," she said, stepping aside to let me in. I didn't know who else to turn to. I followed her into the living room, noticing how disheveled everything looked. The cushions on the couch were askew, and the coffee table had papers scattered all over it. The apartment itself wasn't dirty, but it felt chaotic, like everything in her life was out of control, and she was just trying to keep it all together. Liz didn't sit down right away. She paced back and forth in the living room, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. It was clear that something was weighing heavily on her, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. She looked over at me as if she were searching for something, for a sense of reassurance she hadn't been able to find anywhere else. "I don't know where to start," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I've been feeling like I'm losing everything, losing James, losing myself, and I don't know what to do about it." I sat down on the couch, trying to make myself comfortable, though the situation was far from ordinary. This wasn't just a casual conversation anymore. It felt much more intimate, like I was stepping into a part of Liz's life that I wasn't supposed to see. But she needed someone, and I couldn't back away from that. "Liz, you're not losing everything," I said, though even I wasn't sure if I believed it. "James isn't a bad guy. He's probably just stressed, you know. Work can do that to people." She stopped pacing and looked at me, her eyes wide with frustration. "I know you think that, but I don't know if that's all of it. He's not just stressed, Kyle. He's checked out. He doesn't talk to me like he used to. It's like he's not even here anymore, even when he's physically here." The pain in her voice cut through me. I had known James for a long time, and hearing her talk about him this way made me realize that I had missed something important. I had seen the signs, but I hadn't wanted to see them. I had wanted to believe that everything was fine between them, that James was just going through a rough patch. But Liz's words were shaking that belief to its core. "I'm sorry," she continued, her voice cracking. "I don't know what to do. I've tried talking to him, but it's like he doesn't care anymore. And I don't know if it's something I did or if it's just him, but I feel alone." I could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the desperation to be heard. She was reaching out for someone to understand her, to help her make sense of what was happening in her life. But I couldn't offer her the answers she wanted. I couldn't fix whatever was broken between her and James. "You're not alone," I said softly, trying to comfort her. "You've got people who care about you. You've got me." There was a long silence after that. Liz didn't say anything for a moment, but she looked at me like she was trying to figure out what I meant. Maybe she was trying to understand if I truly meant it, or if I was just saying what she needed to hear. But I did mean it. I cared about Liz, and I wanted to help her. The last thing I wanted was for her to feel abandoned or neglected. But as I sat there, the tension in the room grew heavier. I could feel it, the unspoken shift between us. It wasn't just about her marriage anymore. It wasn't just about me helping out a friend's wife. Something deeper was stirring. There was a connection, something I couldn't explain, but something that felt undeniable. Liz sat down on the couch next to me, and for the first time in a long while, we were silent. There was no rush to fill the space with words, no attempt to ease the discomfort. We just sat there, two people in a moment of shared vulnerability. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was just real. After what felt like an eternity, Liz finally spoke again, her voice small but steady. "I don't know what to do anymore, Kyle. I don't know if it's even worth trying to save anymore. I feel like he doesn't want to be saved." I didn't know what to say to that. How could I? How could I offer her a solution when I had no idea what the right answer was? The truth was, I was just as confused as she was. But one thing was clear. I couldn't turn my back on her, not when she was looking at me like this. I couldn't walk away from someone who needed me. "I don't have all the answers," I said quietly. "But I'll be here for you. I won't leave you hanging." Liz smiled weakly, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Kyle. You don't know how much that means to me." As I left her apartment that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were changing between us, between me and Liz, between me and James. What had started as a simple favor had already grown into something much bigger, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for what that meant. The growing distance. The days that followed were a tangled mess of routine and unresolved tension. I returned to my usual activities: work, gym, dinner with friends. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, my mind kept drifting back to Liz, to her vulnerability, her confessions, and the quiet desperation in her eyes that night. It wasn't like me to dwell on these things. I was the kind of guy who shrugged off heavy conversations, who avoided conflict at all costs. But this situation was different. I couldn't shake the weight of it. And more than that, I couldn't ignore the way my thoughts kept circling back to Liz. I'd seen her in pain, in need, and I had done what any decent friend would do. I'd listened, but now I found myself replaying the conversation over and over in my head. Her words, her feelings, they had left an impression on me I couldn't ignore. I couldn't lie to myself either. Part of me felt a strange sense of connection to her. It was something I wasn't prepared for. I hadn't asked for it, but it was there, creeping into my thoughts, and making everything feel more complicated than it ever had been before. James, on the other hand, seemed oblivious. Or maybe he was choosing to ignore the distance between him and Liz. I wasn't sure anymore. When I saw him, he was the same as always. Charming, charismatic, the life of the party. It was almost as if nothing had changed. He didn't seem bothered by the tension in his relationship with Liz. But then again, he never was one to show vulnerability. James was always the guy who had everything under control, even when he didn't. I tried to spend time with him, to distract myself from what was happening with Liz, but every conversation felt strained. It wasn't overt. James didn't know anything about what had transpired between Liz and me, but I couldn't help but notice the little things. The way he seemed more distant, how he talked about Liz in a way that made it clear he was either unaware of how bad things had gotten, or he was pretending not to see it. It made me feel guilty, like I was keeping a secret I didn't have a right to keep. It wasn't long before I received another call from Liz. The text was brief. "Can you come over? I need to talk." I didn't even hesitate. I knew that whatever she needed to say couldn't wait. Something was still off. I grabbed my jacket, my thoughts racing as I drove to her place. What could it be this time? Another breakdown? More confusion? Or was she finally ready to confront James? I wasn't sure, but I knew I couldn't ignore her anymore. Not when she trusted me so openly. When I arrived, Liz opened the door quickly, as if she'd been waiting for me. Her expression was different this time. More guarded, more reserved. It wasn't the warm, welcoming smile I had seen before. She seemed lost, like she wasn't sure what she wanted from me or what I was supposed to say. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "What's going on?" Liz stepped aside to let me in, but there was an air of hesitation about her. It was almost like she was unsure of how much to let me into her world, unsure of what I would think of her if I knew the whole truth. "Come in," she said quietly. I don't know where to start. Things are just really hard right now." We sat in the living room, the same place we had been before, but it felt like a different room this time. The atmosphere was heavy, the silence stretching between us. I could feel the weight of it, like something unsaid was hanging in the air. Liz didn't start talking right away. She fidgeted with her hands, picking at the hem of her sweater, avoiding my gaze. It was clear she was wrestling with something deeper than the surface-level tension in her relationship. I don't know what to do anymore," she said finally, her voice trembling slightly. "It's like I've been trying so hard to fix things with James, but nothing works. I feel like I'm invisible to him. And the worst part is, I don't even know if he cares anymore." I sat back, trying to process her words, the frustration, the confusion. It was all there, written in the way she spoke, in the way she couldn't meet my eyes. I could feel her pain like it was my own. And for the first time, I realized how deep this issue ran. This wasn't just about a few rough weeks or a tough patch. Liz was questioning her whole relationship, questioning herself. And what made it even more complicated was that she was confiding in me. She was looking to me for support, but there was so much I didn't know, so much I couldn't understand. "I've tried everything, Kyle," she continued, her voice growing more frantic. "I've talked to him about how I feel, but he doesn't listen. It's like he's checked out of our marriage completely. I don't know if he even sees me anymore." I wanted to say something reassuring, something that would make her feel better, but the truth was, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to fix this. I couldn't offer any concrete answers. "I'm sure it's not easy," I said finally, though the words felt empty. "But it sounds like he's going through something too. Maybe he's just overwhelmed with work, or maybe he's dealing with something he hasn't told you about." Liz looked at me, her eyes full of uncertainty. "You don't get it, Kyle. It's not just that. It's like he's not here anymore. Even when he's around, he's distant. And I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending everything is fine when it isn't." I could hear the anguish in her voice, the quiet panic that she was trying so hard to hide. But I couldn't fix it. I couldn't be the one to make it better for her. Not when I was so conflicted myself. "I don't know what to tell you, Liz," I said gently, trying to keep my emotions in check. "I think you need to talk to him. You can't keep carrying this on your own. You need to get him to open up, to tell you what's going on." She shook her head, tears starting to well up in her eyes. "I've tried, Kyle. I've tried to get him to talk, but he just shuts me out. I can't keep fighting for a relationship when it feels like I'm the only one who cares." The tears she'd been holding back finally fell, and I couldn't look away. I wanted to comfort her, but I didn't know how. I wasn't sure if I could be the one to make it better. After all, I was only a friend, someone who had been thrust into the middle of a complicated situation I had no place being in. "You don't have to do this alone," I said softly, my voice almost a whisper. "I'm here for you, Liz. Whatever you need." She looked at me then, her gaze searching mine for something I couldn't quite name. There was a longing there, something unspoken but real. But I couldn't let myself read too much into it. I couldn't let myself get lost in whatever was happening between us. It wasn't fair to James, and it certainly wasn't fair to Liz. We sat there in silence for a long time, neither of us knowing what to say next. The tension in the room had shifted again. I could feel it in the air, thick and palpable. The more we talked, the more I realized that this wasn't just about Liz and James anymore. It was about me too. I was becoming more involved than I ever should have been, and I didn't know how to pull back. When I finally left, I felt more conflicted than ever. I had promised myself I would stay out of their personal issues, but now it felt impossible to do so. Something was changing, and I wasn't sure if I could stop it. I couldn't deny the connection that had formed between Liz and me, and that terrified me. Because no matter how much I tried to ignore it, the more I spent time with her, the harder it became to keep my distance. The breaking point. The days that followed were a blur of contradictions. On the surface, everything looked normal. Work, gym, the usual weekend hangouts with friends. But underneath it all, a storm was brewing. I couldn't stop thinking about Liz. Every time I saw her, the weight of the conversations we'd had together, the unspoken tension that now hung between us, pressed on my chest. It wasn't just the way she'd opened up about her marriage. It was the way she'd looked at me, her eyes searching mine as though she was silently begging for something she couldn't name. And deep down, I knew I was starting to feel something too. A connection that had been building between us, unspoken but undeniable. I tried to push it away. I tried to focus on my friendship with James, to remind myself that he was my best friend, and that whatever was happening with Liz was between them. But the more I avoided it, the more it gnawed at me. It was like trying to ignore a growing fire. The more I denied it, the hotter it burned. I couldn't pretend I didn't feel the pull between us. I couldn't deny that every time Liz smiled, or touched my arm, or looked at me with that look I could never quite define, something in me responded. I knew it was wrong. I knew I should be loyal to James, but the guilt only made it more complicated. What if James had already known something was wrong with his relationship? What if he was as aware of the distance between them as I was, but he couldn't find the courage to address it? What if I was just overthinking things? I didn't know the answers, and the more I tried to convince myself to stay out of it, the deeper I was drawn into their mess. It was late one evening when I received another message from Liz. This time, it wasn't just a simple text asking me to come over. It was urgent, desperate. Please come. I don't know who else to turn to right now. I didn't even think twice. The pull to be there for her, to comfort her, to give her something stable in a world that was falling apart around her, was too strong. I grabbed my jacket and left, my mind racing. What could this be about? Was it another breakdown? Another confession? Every time I saw her, things seemed to get more complicated, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to be there for her, even if it meant walking down a dangerous path. When I arrived at her place, Liz was already waiting by the door, her face pale and tense. Her eyes were bloodshot, as if she had been crying for hours. The minute I stepped inside, I could feel the weight of the situation. Something was off. The apartment was silent, too silent. It felt like the calm before a storm. Liz was standing near the window, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She didn't turn around when I entered, as if she were afraid to face me. "Liz?" I called gently, stepping closer. She turned slowly, her expression a mix of fear and confusion. "Kyle," she said, her voice trembling. I don't know what to do anymore." I could hear the desperation in her tone. And I knew this wasn't something small. This wasn't just about a few rough days with James. This was something deeper, something that had reached a breaking point. "What happened?" I asked softly, trying to gauge her mood. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," she said, her voice cracking. "About James, about us, about what's been happening between us, and I just can't keep pretending anymore." My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't a casual conversation. This was it. This was the moment I had feared but also secretly expected. I swallowed hard, unsure of what I was walking into, but knowing I couldn't walk away now. "Liz, whatever it is, you don't have to go through it alone." She looked up at me, her eyes wide, searching my face as if looking for some kind of reassurance. But what could I say? What could I offer her when I was just as lost as she was? "I think." She paused, taking a deep breath as though she were summoning the courage to say something she had been holding back for a long time. I think I'm in love with you, Kyle. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't know how to respond. I hadn't expected this, at least not this soon, not like this. Liz had always been married to James, and she had always been his. I had never, even for a second, considered that she might feel something for me beyond friendship. But now, hearing her say it out loud, everything changed. The air in the room felt heavier, charged with something that was both terrifying and exhilarating. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to run, to get as far away from this situation as possible. I had always prided myself on being the guy who stayed out of complicated emotions, but another part of me, the part I didn't want to acknowledge, was tempted by her confession. The connection we had, the way she had opened up to me, it had never felt like this before. Liz, I started, my voice thick with confusion. You're married to James. He's my best friend. This isn't something we can just ignore. She shook her head, her eyes filled with regret. I know. Believe me, I know. But I can't keep pretending it's not there. I've tried so hard to fight it, to push it down, but every time I see you, it's like everything else disappears. I can't fight how I feel anymore. I felt the tension building between us, a silent battle waging in my chest. I couldn't deny what I felt. I couldn't ignore the way my heart raced when I was near her, the way she made me feel alive in a way that I hadn't felt in a long time. But I was also torn. I couldn't betray James. I couldn't betray my best friend, the man I had known for years, the man who had always had my back. I don't know what to do with this, Liz, I said, my voice barely a whisper. This is too much. You and James, I can't just throw that away. Liz stepped closer, her face softening, her expression full of pain. I don't want to hurt James. I don't want to hurt anyone. But I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending that I'm happy when I'm not. I don't know what I want anymore, but I know that I can't ignore this feeling. Not anymore. The words hung in the air between us, each one heavy with unspoken emotions. There was a moment of silence, a moment where everything seemed to freeze. It wasn't just about the confession anymore. It was about everything that had led up to this point. Every moment of tension, every glance, every word we had shared. It was about the choices we had made and the choices we were about to make. I don't know if I can do this, Liz, I said, my voice filled with guilt. It feels like it's crossing a line I can't come back from. Liz looked at me, her eyes searching mine, pleading for understanding. I know, she whispered. I know it's a line we can't uncross. But I had to tell you. I couldn't keep carrying this inside. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. This was the moment that would define everything. The moment I either chose loyalty or gave into what I felt for her. But I couldn't find the strength to walk away, not yet. Not when the pull between us was so strong, so undeniable. The room felt smaller as we stood there, the distance between us growing with every second that passed. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if I could make things right again. But one thing was certain. Nothing would ever be the same. Not for me, not for Liz, and certainly not for James. I finally spoke, my voice low and steady, though my heart was anything but calm. I need time to think about all this, Liz. I need to figure out what I'm doing. She nodded, her face a mixture of relief and regret. I understand, but please, don't think that I don't care. I had to be honest with you. As I left that night, my mind was a storm of emotions. I had crossed a line, and now I had no idea how to go back. Would I choose to fight for my friendship with James, or would I give in to the temptation that Liz had laid before me? Whatever I decided, I knew one thing for sure. Nothing would ever be simple again. The quiet consequences. In the days that followed, everything felt different. The world around me continued on, unaffected by the internal chaos I was experiencing, but I couldn't shake the weight of what had transpired between Liz and me. Her confession had opened a door, one I hadn't been prepared to open, and now I was standing on the threshold of something dangerous. I had tried to distance myself from the situation, to bury myself in work, to keep my mind occupied with anything that could keep me from facing the reality of what was happening. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, Liz's words echoed in my mind. "I think I'm in love with you, Kyle." Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, the vulnerability in her eyes, the quiet desperation that had laced her voice. I had never expected anything like this from her, or from myself. I had been James's best friend for years. We had shared everything. Our triumphs, our struggles, our secrets. How could I betray him now? And yet, every time I tried to push Liz from my thoughts, the pull grew stronger. It was like the universe was testing me, forcing me to make a choice I wasn't ready to make. I tried to meet up with James to regain some semblance of normalcy, but every time I looked at him, I was reminded of how much I was losing. The bond we shared, the trust, the understanding, felt more fragile than ever. I couldn't look at him without feeling like I was carrying a secret too heavy to bear. And it wasn't just about Liz's confession anymore. It was about everything that was happening beneath the surface, the things that were left unsaid between us. James and I went out for drinks one night, just the two of us, like we used to. But the usual ease of our conversations was gone. Every word felt forced. Every laugh seemed hollow. I kept looking for signs that maybe James knew something was wrong. Maybe he could sense the tension between us. But he was the same as always, charming, laid back, unaware of the storm brewing around him. "So, what's been going on with you lately?" James asked casually, swirling his drink. "You've been kind of quiet. Something on your mind?" I froze. It wasn't the first time he had asked me that, but this time, the question felt different. He was asking me if everything was all right, but I couldn't answer. How could I tell him the truth? How could I tell him that his wife had confessed her feelings for me, that I had been the one she turned to when things fell apart? The very thought of it made me feel sick. "Just a lot of stuff," I muttered, trying to sound casual. "Work, life. You know how it is." James nodded, taking a sip from his glass, oblivious to the inner turmoil I was drowning in. But I could feel the lie hanging in the air between us, thick and suffocating. I left the bar that night feeling more lost than I had in a long time. I had lied to my best friend, and the guilt was eating at me. But at the same time, something inside me was stirring, a restlessness, a longing I didn't know how to control. Every interaction with Liz, every moment we shared, had chipped away at the distance I had put between us. I wanted to be there for her. I wanted to protect her, to help her heal. But I was also terrified of what that might mean. What would it mean for my friendship with James? What would it mean for us? The next few days passed in a haze. I couldn't focus on anything. I went through the motions, waking up, going to work, pretending everything was fine. But I couldn't stop thinking about Liz. I couldn't stop thinking about the way she looked at me, the way she had poured her heart out to me. I couldn't deny the connection we had, even though every part of me screamed that it was wrong. It was during one of our text conversations that Liz reached out again. This time, it was even more urgent than before. "Kyle, please, I need to see you. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending that I'm okay." I didn't even think twice. I grabbed my keys, threw on my jacket, and headed to her place. I knew I was walking into dangerous territory, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to be there for her. I owed it to her. I owed it to myself. When I arrived, Liz was waiting by the door, her face pale, her eyes wide with worry. It was clear she had been crying. She didn't say anything at first. She just stepped aside to let me in, her silence speaking volumes. We sat in the living room again, the space between us filled with the same heavy tension that had settled there the last time. This time, though, something felt different. Liz seemed more fragile, more broken. It wasn't just the turmoil in her marriage. It was something deeper, something that I couldn't quite name. "I don't know what to do anymore, Kyle," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've tried to fix everything with James, but I can't. And I can't keep pretending that everything's fine when it's not. I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know where I belong." I reached out and placed a hand on her arm, trying to offer some form of comfort, though I felt just as lost as she did. I wasn't sure what to say. What was there to say? Her words hit me hard, resonating in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't just about the way she felt about me anymore. It was about the way she felt about herself, the emptiness that had settled in her heart. I understood her pain in a way that I didn't want to. "I know it's hard," I said quietly, "but you can't keep carrying this on your own. You need to talk to James. You can't fix everything by yourself." Liz shook her head, her eyes brimming with tears. "I've tried, Kyle. I've tried to talk to him. I've tried to make him see me. But it's like he's gone, like he's already moved on, even though he's still here." I wanted to tell her that everything would be okay, that things would get better, but I couldn't. The reality was that I didn't know how to fix what was broken. I didn't know if it was even possible to fix it, but I couldn't walk away from her. Not when she needed me. Not when I felt so connected to her, even though I knew I shouldn't. I sat there, caught between two worlds. On one hand, there was my loyalty to James, the bond we had built over years, the friendship we shared. And on the other hand, there was Liz, her pain, her vulnerability, and the undeniable connection we had developed. I didn't know how to navigate this anymore. I didn't know what was right, what was wrong, or if there was even a clear path forward. "Please, Kyle," Liz whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know who else to turn to. I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending." Her words pierced through me, cutting through the fog in my mind. The confusion, the guilt, the fear, all of it swirled inside me. I didn't want to hurt anyone, but I also couldn't ignore how I felt. I didn't know what was happening between us, but I knew it couldn't be undone. And that scared me more than anything. "I don't know what to say, Liz," I said finally, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry, but I'm not sure I can help you. I don't know how to make this right." Liz looked at me, her face filled with pain and desperation. "I don't need you to fix it, Kyle. I just need you to understand. I need you to see me." I nodded, but I wasn't sure what she wanted from me. What could I offer her that she hadn't already given up on? What could I say that would make any of this better? The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I didn't know where we were going, but I knew one thing for sure. Nothing was going to be the same. Not anymore. As I left that night, the weight of everything that had happened hung over me. I had crossed a line. I wasn't sure if I could undo what had been done, but I also knew that, whatever happened, I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. I had to face the consequences, whether I was ready for them or not. The choices we make. The days that followed felt like a maze I couldn't find my way out of. I had spent the last few years trying to build a life that was predictable, a life where I knew what to expect, where I was in control. But now, everything was falling apart, and I had no idea how to stop it. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Liz's face, the pain, the confusion, the vulnerability. I felt it, too, the weight of her words, the unspoken things that hung between us. It wasn't just the tension in her marriage. It wasn't just the things that had been left unsaid between us. It was everything. I had always prided myself on making decisions quickly, on being able to think on my feet, to know what needed to be done and when. But with Liz, with James, I was lost. I couldn't make sense of any of it. I couldn't understand what was happening in my own heart. I tried to distance myself, but the pull of their lives, of my life with them, kept drawing me back into the middle of it. And I was drowning. I kept replaying the conversation I'd had with Liz the night before, the rawness of her admission still ringing in my ears. "I think I'm in love with you, Kyle." I had never expected it. Not from her, not from anyone. I had known Liz for years, but this, it was different. It wasn't some fleeting moment of attraction. It was real, It was deep, and it had shaken me to my core. How could I have missed it? How could I have been so blind to the connection that had always been there between us? The problem wasn't just the way she felt. The problem was the way I felt, too. Every time I saw her, every time we talked, I couldn't ignore the way my heart sped up, the way she made me feel like I was truly seen, truly understood. She wasn't just James's wife anymore. She wasn't just a friend. She was someone I was beginning to care about in ways I couldn't explain. But I couldn't act on it. I couldn't do this to James. James. I had spent so much time trying to block out my growing feelings for Liz, I hadn't realized just how much I had distanced myself from him. We still hung out, still shared a drink now and then, but it was never the same. Every conversation with him felt empty, every laugh hollow. It wasn't just the guilt of keeping secrets from him. It was the weight of knowing things would never be the same. I couldn't be his friend the way I used to, not with all the things that had happened between Liz and me. The honesty between us had eroded. I didn't know how to talk to him anymore. It was in the middle of one of these silent nights that I received a text from Liz again. I should have ignored it. I should have kept my distance. But I couldn't. I couldn't leave her in this place of uncertainty, not when I knew how much she was struggling. Can we meet? I can't keep doing this. I need to talk to you, Kyle. I didn't hesitate. I dropped everything and left. I wasn't thinking clearly anymore. All I knew was that I had to be there for her. What was happening between us had already crossed a line. There was no going back. But what would I do with that? What was I supposed to do now? When I arrived at her apartment, the weight of the situation hit me all over again. Liz was waiting for me at the door, but this time, she looked more defeated than I had ever seen her. Her eyes were red from crying, and her shoulders were hunched with the weight of whatever had been going on in her mind. This wasn't the confident, poised woman I had always known. This was someone who was unraveling, someone who didn't know how to put the pieces of herself back together. I don't know where to start, Kyle, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to fix any of this. I don't know how to fix me, or how to fix us. I could feel the desperation in her voice, and it made something inside me twist. I wanted to tell her everything would be fine, that we could figure it out, but I couldn't. I couldn't lie to her, and I couldn't lie to myself. I didn't know how to fix anything. You don't have to fix anything, I said quietly, my voice filled with uncertainty. We don't have to have all the answers right now. Liz looked at me, her gaze piercing through me like she was searching for something I didn't have. But I need more than that, Kyle, she said, her voice breaking. I need to know what I'm supposed to do. I need to know what's real, what matters. And I need to know if you're really here for me, or if this is just a phase. Because I can't keep going like this, pretending that everything is okay when it's not. Her words hit me like a wave, crashing into everything I had been trying to keep together. What was I supposed to say to her? What was I supposed to tell her when I didn't even know what was happening with myself? I had already crossed a line, and now there was no going back. The choice had been made. It wasn't about whether I could walk away from Liz. It was about whether I could live with myself if I did. Could I really turn my back on someone who needed me, who saw me in ways no one else had? Could I live with the idea of abandoning her, knowing she felt so alone? But there was also the question of James. I couldn't ignore that, no matter how much I wanted to. Could I betray him like this? Could I destroy everything we had built? The years of friendship, the shared experiences, the brotherhood that had always been a constant in my life. Could I walk away from that? I need you to make a choice, Liz said, her voice steady now, though her eyes were filled with an emotion I couldn't quite define. I can't keep living in this limbo, Kyle. I need to know if we can be something more, or if this was just a mistake, because I can't keep pretending it's nothing. The weight of her words pressed down on me, and for the first time, I realized just how deep I was in this. It wasn't just about feelings anymore. It was about choices, about what kind of man I wanted to be, about what kind of life I wanted to live. And I didn't have the answers. I didn't know if there was a right or wrong choice. "I can't make this decision for you, Liz," I said quietly, my voice cracking. "I'm as lost as you are. I don't know what to do with all of this." Liz took a step closer, her face inches from mine. "I need you to make a choice, Kyle. For both of us." The room was silent for a long time, and all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat. Every part of me was screaming to just walk away, to leave it all behind, to protect myself from the consequences. But another part of me, the part I couldn't ignore anymore, was telling me that I couldn't run from this. I had already made the choice to be involved. I had already crossed a line. But what was next? How could I live with the consequences of this? And what would I do when the day came that I had to face James?